Good morning, everybody. Now, I've been asked the same question a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the question is, what is woke? Which is a very interesting question because I talk about restoring common sense and being anti-woke for a lot, and I have done for a number of years, and so do a lot of other people who want to restore common sense to our nation, and indeed throughout Western civilization. But the actual question that asks you to define what woke is a little bit hard to answer. And the people that asked me that question were not really asking it from the point of view is that they were interested in an opinion. They were actually trying to catch me out. So one of them was a BBC interviewer. The other person was a leftist I was on a panel with in a GB News show, and they just put the question to me when I was talking about LGBT stuff and the nonsense of that. So they said, "What is woke then?" What I did, because it did catch me out a little bit, although it's I didn't let them see that it did. It's very easy to give an example of what woke is, but actually to define it is harder. I've been thinking about this, and this is what I've come up with as the answer. You see, woke as a word is not something that most people had ever heard of as a word or even used as a word until 3 or 4 years ago. It's only about 2018, 2019. People started using the word woke to critique the madness of political correctness. It did exist before then. It was created in the 1960s, and it was very much integrated into the civil rights movement in the USA, where there were real issues of oppression with black people not allowed to ride in the same part of the bus as white people back in the 1950s, 1960s America. They couldn't go to the same universities and so on. So there was real oppression there. And if you were woke in 1960s America, you were someone who supported the civil rights movement. Okay, that's all very noble. But what it means now is something a little bit different. So before people were using the word woke, we used to use the word or the term political correctness, and that people often used to say political correctness has gone mad, which it had done, and it has been building up to a state of madness and insanity for decades. But the ideology that underpins political correctness or wokeness or wokery, whatever you call it, is cultural Marxism. So the answer to what woke is wokery is cultural Marxism. And what cultural Marxism is continually fabricating a continuous stream of oppressor-victim narratives in order to undermine our society, our nation, our civilization. And these new oppressor-victim narratives are fabricated, and they're not real. They just create the idea that society is systematically or systemically oppressive when it isn't. Unlike with the civil rights movement, there was real systemic oppression in 21st century the UK, most of Western civilization society. There isn't systemic oppression. The UK never had an issue with race like the USA did, because it's a different history and a different culture and so on. But we're now told that we are systemically racist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, and all these other things, which are all based on specific oppressor victim narratives that have been fabricated. So of course Marxism, original Marxism from the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848 by Marx and Engels, says or suggests that the workers are the oppressed, the capitalists are the oppressors. So workers are victims of capitalists, businessmen, landowners, and so on. And what they say needs to happen to undo this oppression is that workers needed to come to a point where they had class consciousness, where they saw themselves as a group, a class, a collective of millions of people who were oppressed by this other class, the upper class, the businessman, landowner class, capitalist, bourgeoisie, whatever word you like to use to call them. So the way that they would then overcome their oppression is to rise up in revolution and take the wealth and the assets of the capitalists, business owners, landowners, and collectivize it for themselves. So they would take it and then they would collectivize it and say that everybody owns all of the assets that the capitalists used to own in common. And that was Marx postulated that would end oppression of the workers. Of course, whenever it's been tried, it leads to even greater oppression and even greater poverty and even greater hunger and death and tyranny and so on, as we've seen over the terrible history of the 20th century with the Soviet Union and China and Cambodia and Cuba and Venezuela and all kinds of other places where it's been tried. So it doesn't work. It didn't even work in the West in the early 20th century, where Marxists, communists tried to inculcate revolutions in the Western world. It didn't work because basically the workers in the West were generally happy and satisfied. You know, they all knew they didn't have everything, but life was getting better. And also there was a strong civil society, and also there was a strong Christian faith. And in Christian faith, unlike any other faiths, people are taught and encouraged to be grateful for what you have and to be satisfied with what you have and to forgive other people, even if they oppress you and even if they are your enemies. Well, that communism is completely the opposite of that. Like, well, if you feel oppressed, take something from somebody else, you know. So there's a very different set of principles there. That's why communists hate Christians and Christianity. One of the reasons why they do that. So communism never took off in Western civilization. So in the 1920s and 30s, there were a variety of Western-based Marxist and communist, Gramsci, the people associated with the Frankfurt School, Adorno and so on, who Horkheimer and others, came up with critical theory as a manner in which to undermine the culture of Western civilization so that it would pave the way for a communist revolution. So they then took the oppressor-victim idea, dialectic, as Marxists call it, and used that and transferred it from an economic dialectic with workers and capitalists into a series of cultural dialectics, oppressor-victim narratives based on characteristics. So you can apply it to almost any characteristic you can think of. So first of all, men and women. So the idea is that if you apply that oppressor-victim narrative to gender or sex, gender is a relatively new term, that's a whole other video, but to biological sex, men are the oppressors and women are the victims. So then you get feminism growing up and saying that society is systemically sexist and they need to smash the patriarchy. And then you can apply it to race. So white people are the oppressors, black people or brown people are the oppressed. Society is systemically racist. They need to rise up and overthrow white power and white supremacy. And then you can apply it to sexual orientation. So you could say homosexuals are oppressed. The heterosexuals are the oppressors, particularly those people who are Christian as well, have a go at Christianity for sort of teaching traditional family values about marriage being a man and a woman, and saying, well, society is systemically homophobic, which again is another new word that was created, I think, in the 1950s to give power to the narrative when it was in the rhetoric that people use. So therefore, you need to fundamentally change society. You need to redefine marriage and so on in order to overcome this systemic homophobia. And then there's transphobia. So transsexuals, transgenders are oppressed by cisgenders, and so particularly cisgender women. And then the transgenders are now going after females, women who were at the top of their own oppressor victim narrative. Now they are seen as the oppressors rather than the victims. And so society is inherently systemically transphobic, and that oppression needs to be removed by changing the laws, changing the definition of gender, and introducing the concept of gender on top of biological sex, and saying that gender is fluid, and everybody has to give trans rights to people who say they are trans, even though that's just a fabricated concept. And then there's the Islamophobia narrative. Society is inherently Islamophobic. So Muslims are oppressed and non-Muslims are the oppressors, and so we need to change the laws and to bring in a rule about Islamophobic speech and so on, and then you can apply that in general to migrants being oppressed and non-migrants being the oppressors. And so we need to have open door immigration, and anyone who speaks against mass rapid immigration is guilty of oppression, and therefore they need to be accused and convicted of a hate crime and so on. And so there's a never-ending stream of new oppressor victim narratives. That's what cultural Marxism is. That's what political correctness is, and that is what wokeness or wokery is as well. So that's the fundamental philosophy and ideology behind it, and it is utterly destructive and corrosive, because this is not the UK, and most countries in the West are not any of those things. They're not systemically racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, or anything. In fact, they're the least of those things in all cases. But the inversion that goes with the rhetoric and ideology of cultural Marxism causes immense cognitive dissonance to everybody, because they're trying to get you to accept that something that is completely not true is actually true, and everything, the reality is turned on its head, and that causes, that can cause people to go mad. It does, when you try to think about the narratives that you come across, that you're supposed to believe, that you're supposed to sign up to, and you almost have to affirm these days just to keep a job. If you speak out against any of these things, you might find you lose your job. So people are coerced into affirming things that they know are simply wrong. Very much like in Orwell's book 1984. So that's why wokery is so corrosive and toxic, and that's what it actually is. And the only way to counter it, well, two ways to counter it. One is to speak out, and you've got to be bold and speak out and speak the truth, and just all the time lay into this insanity that wokery is. And it's easy to speak out against the transgender narrative because it's so utterly insane. It's harder sometimes to speak out against some of the others, but that one really is, and that's the Achilles heel, I think, of wokery at the moment, because they're trying to insist that everybody affirms something that clearly is not true, that men are women, or when men can be women and women can be men, and so on. So that's a good example to use if anyone asks you what is wokery and you can't think of give an actual explanation. But that is the explanation. As I've said, it's all cultural Marxist ideology. So one way to fight this is to just be bold and speak out and start speaking the truth and restoring common sense. Second way, as I've said in other videos and other places as well, it's not just an intellectual battle, this is a spiritual battle. because, you know, clearly it's psychological, but it's also spiritual as well. I'm a Christian. I pray to Jesus to restore sanity to our nation and our civilization, and to remove all of this craziness from our country. So that's another way you can accept that, if you like, and do what you like with that. But anyway, that's my thought for the day, or the start of the month anyway. It's the 1st of August today. You might be watching this later, but this is when I'm recording it. So I hope you found it interesting, and thanks for watching. Please do come and join me in the Heritage Party, because we are trying to restore sanity in the political sphere and get into places of power where we can overturn the laws that actually reinforce the insanity of wokery, such as the Equalities Act, such as the upcoming Online Safety Bill, and Communications Act, Section 127, and so on. We want to get rid of all those things and put in place Freedom Act, Free Speech Act, to repeal all of those laws and ensure that if you speak from a position of common sense rather than wokery, that you will not lose your job, you will not be cancelled, you will not be discriminated against in any way, which is absolutely wrong. That is happening to an increasing level in our society and needs to be overturned. So please do join us in the Heritage Party. The link is below in the box. Give me a thumbs up if you can, and please do subscribe to my channel as well. Okay, thank you everybody. Have a lovely day. God bless you all.